So I never want to say like, I'm done when I'm satisfied, right? Because we've accomplished this, then the next thing will come up. Because not only is the environment and the threat changing so rapidly, that drive for innovation, that drive for development, that drive to do things differently, question the status quo, should never end.
From the Defense and Aerospace Report, this is The Downlink, a podcast about the intersection of space, the space business, and defense. Not just what's over the horizon, but what's happening above it. I'm your host, Laura Winter. Hey there, podcasters. We're just days away from the Space Force's 5th birthday. So this week's episode is coming to you from the Space Force Association's 2nd annual Space Power Conference in Orlando, Florida. Of course, it had all the Space Force leadership grandees, but this really wasn't their party. This gathering is for the rank and file, the enlisted, as well as the officers, the uniformed and civilian guardians, for the people who have the responsibility of securing the space domain. That's not to say that leadership didn't have a thing or two to say. And if you have been paying attention to the language, the words leadership deployed in settings such as on the Hill and the budget hearings earlier this year, those were somewhat muted. But this week, I noted that now the Chief of Space Operations, General Chance Salty Saltzman, said, quote, "Now it's a fight for resources and to make sure we buy the right equipment." But as I said at the top, the Space Power Conference is really about Guardians, which is why I'm sharing this next piece of sound from the press conference with the CSO.
Going forward in the future.
But do you have a particular lesson that you've learned that you would want to share with us?
Yeah, the big lesson, the big takeaway is it's so easy to get enamored by the on-orbit technology, right? We want to buy the next constellation. Industry loves talking about satellites and launching satellites, but you have to train the operators. We have to have the test and training infrastructure, the simulators, the venues where they can practice their tradecraft over and over again. And so that's what we're really trying to make sure is that we're doing all of the other things that allow us to present the kind of force that a combatant commander is taking. So the lesson that I'm trying to make sure everybody understands is what we present to a combatant commander is not satellites. We present a military force. That's all the people, that's the training, that's the tactics, and it's the equipment in the form of the satellites. So sometimes we present GPS to, no, we don't. We present a warfighting squadron that happens to use GPS to do their mission. That's the big take. And we got to have all the processes to support that.
This next clip is from Chief Master Sergeant John Bentivegna's speech. Note his use of the words deserve and owe.
But I had a chance to attend Space Flag out of Colorado. It was 25 TAC 1. I was blown away. Blown away by how far that environment has changed and the paces that we're putting our warfighters through from an exercise perspective, helping them understand the domain. The largest space flag I think we've had, 56 squadrons, 11 deltas, 85 operational planners, 31 tactical planners, 111 ops crew members, 373 participants. All focused on the domain and the fight and integration and lessons learned. That's exactly the environment our Guardians deserve. And I was so impressed in how far it's come over 5 years. So to General Sheba and Chief Pogue, hey, you guys doing it right. You guys doing it right. And the 392nd Combat Training Squadron who's doing all this, this is service level exercises. We owe you more. We owe you more, but what you have, you're working at it. And it was phenomenal. I was so impressed with the focus on the threat and the focus on getting after operational business that the Guardians had.
So this is not an episode about the federal budget or the latest contract the Space Force has been able to award or grand geopolitical strategery. No, this episode is about the Space Force, the service branch, and the evolution of Guardian identity, Guardian culture. It's a progress check marking the Space Force's birthday, and there is no one better to peel back the lid and to speak about the most important asset the Space Force presents to combatant commands, that's its people, than this week's guest, the Chief Master Sergeant, Space Force. As a quick suggestion, if you want to acquire a deeper sense of the progress made, listen to our first interview, which we recorded a year ago at the same venue. And so, without further delay, here's our conversation. Hi, B9. Welcome back to the Downlink Podcast.
Thanks a lot. I'm excited to be here again at the SFA. 2 years in a row, we get a chance to connect. I'm excited about it and happy to talk to you.
Excellent. You know, it's really clear from the cheers here at the Space Power Conference that every uniformed and civilian Guardian, right? I mean, they all know who you are. But others, like founders and investors, engineers and academics who may be very deeply invested in terms of effort as well as capital in defense and space activities, they may not be so familiar with who you are and what you do. So please take a moment and introduce yourself. You know, what you do, where you do it, how you do it.
All right. So my full kind of rank and title is Chief Master Sergeant of the Space Force, John Bentivegna. I am the senior most enlisted member of the United States Space Force, which is the 6th branch of the Department of Defense. We're excited. We're about to be 5 years old. December on the 20th, we'll be 5 this year. So like all the other services, I work at the Pentagon. So I have an office in the Pentagon. You know, the Space Force is under the Department of the Air Force. So under the department, you have the Air Force and the Space Force. It's a very similar concept under the Department of the Navy, has the Navy and the Marine Corps. There's a very similar with that. So in the Pentagon where I work in the same hallway with the Secretary of the Air Force and the Undersecretary, the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, Chief Flossie, he's just down the hall from me. So is the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. So we all kind of work together in the Pentagon. And
Have they changed the decoration on the hallways to reflect that?
Yeah. So
Cool.
there is. So there's actually a Space Force hallway leading into where the senior leaders kind of reside. And actually, we're in the process right now of reviewing what's there to see, because 5 years into this journey, a lot has changed. So we're looking at how do we update to tell the story of Guardians in the Space Force within our Space Force hallway that we have in the Pentagon. But yeah, there's no mistaking about it. Today you go there, there's the Space Force Deltas, and it'll say, that the sky is not the limit, Semper Supra, always above. You'll know you're in a Space Force hallway as you walk to come visit us.
I do have to come visit you. I am going to take you up on that. But I know for today, you're going to take some time to, as you say, brag on the accomplishments of your Guardians. But I also want us to take a moment to do some reflecting, right? Space Force is on the cusp, as you said, of being 5 years old, and you've been the top enlisted officer for just more than a year now, almost as long, or actually longer, a little longer than when we last spoke, which was a year ago. And at that time that we spoke about developing space-minded culture. And in the parlance of policy, developing the Guardian spirit. But that was 12 months ago. And you were new in the job, still taking stock before plotting the course. How would you describe the state of the Force culture then? And what were your priorities last year, right? Because you spoke of identifying behaviors that were acceptable and those that were unacceptable. There was an emphasis on being space-minded, right, to become masters of the domain. But now the talk is different, right? It's about being warfighter-minded, I'd say.
Yes.
And that, too, is more pronounced. That's a really different kind of shift from where we were 12 months ago, no?
Yes. So, space as a domain, as a Space Force. So when we spoke last year, I think I was only in a job for a couple months. Now I've been doing space operations for many years as an airman, even before the Space Force was established, and a couple of years before that. But the process of building
the identity and the culture of the Space Force has been not slow, but very methodical and very deliberate. To not rush to try and emulate anyone or anything else, to not just look at, pop culture or how others want to define us, but allow us to define ourselves. So last year when we talked about being space-minded, that was kind of an echo of where we were as a service, as a Space Force, to get people comfortable with it. Space is a domain that we're responsible for. Now we talk about warfighting because the past 12 to 13 months, we talk about the service standing up service components to other combatant commands, which is a normal thing that services do within the Department of Defense. Though that may be very obvious to if you're a soldier or a Marine or a sailor out there, but for us, it was a significant achievement to present forces to the combatant commands through service components, to have a force generation model, SPA 4 Gen, which is the model we use to present those force elements. These lexicons, these terms didn't exist really, right, as embraced a year ago as they are now. So when we talk about being a culture, cultivating the warfighter, it's because as a service, we really have evolved to normalize, right, and speak in the same lexicon and normalize our responsibilities, our roles within the joint fight and the joint force. So it's changing the words, changing how we approach things, that we are the sixth branch of the Department of Defense. We present forces to combatant commands. We don't present capabilities. We present forces. These are all important nuances that the journey of the last 13 months through General Saltzman's leadership, they kind of changed. What are we trying to do? What is that culture and identity? And it's all homegrown. These are not things that people forced upon us. It's not something we looked external to get. That's why, it's nuanced change, but from the inside, it's really, really important. From the outside, maybe it's hard for people to understand what I'm saying, but culturally, and the significance of what we've been doing the last 13 months is really, really significant and important.
It also speaks to responsibility,
yes,
though, too, doesn't it? I mean, because before, when you think about being space-minded, and I hate to say it this way, but I do think it's kind of true. I mean, the view, I think, from the joint force would be, well, this is just Verizon over the horizon, right? This is not what this is about. This is about fighting above the horizon and keeping, our assets secure for when we need them to protect our homeland.
Yeah, I think,
and that's a responsibility.
Yeah, an example of a little bit of a change in the mindset was I was at the the Army Sergeant Major's Academy at Fort Bliss a couple months ago. I had a chance to engage with the class that was there, and he asked me to come talk about leadership, but also talk about the Space Force. And I used one of the canned briefs that we kind of have, and there's a slide in there that says, why is there a Space Force? And I told that audience, I said, I love having a chance to come talk to you, and this is an interesting brief, but I am tired of this slide. I don't want to have this slide in a slide deck anymore. I'm tired of talking about why there's a Space Force. We spent the last 4.5 years, 5 years, I think, telling that story. Space-minded, it is we're at the point now, it has got to pivot to the warfighting culture. General Saltzman had mentioned it yesterday. I think another indicator of how far we've come and where we are today is when we have senior leaders wearing other uniforms that are talking about the criticality of space to the warfighting efforts. I think he talked about Admiral Aquilino, who is the commander of Indo-PACOM, talking about how critical space forces are to allowing him to stay on track for whatever O-plan, whatever capabilities that he's thinking about in his AOR.
So to continue with this, how should I say, more weighty cultural development, I find it really interesting that when you speak to your guardians, to your enlisted, you often say that you owe them. And it's not like owing them a favor or a ride or a tool. You say that you owe them. And you said this about the 3rd Combat Training Squadron in Colorado, right? And you said this in the context of Space Flag, which is a war game, just for everybody out there who's listening. It's a training exercise. And you said it was an environment that they deserved, right? There's these words of owe and deserve.
Yes.
And you said you owed them accountability. I'd really love for you to explain that, why you're using these words. And because this is also part of leadership culture
Yeah.
for the whole force.
It's interesting how you pick up on that, because I don't know if I purposely do that, or it's just, unconsciously kind of say those words, because like we talked earlier, I didn't have prepared comments. I had some notes I was going off of. But I think it's the 393rd or 392nd, Battles will get you the correct combat training squadron that does that.
Okay.
But it was Space Flag that I went to go visit. So why do I say that? I sit in the Pentagon, right? And I advocate for what our Guardians need. The Guardians that are in the trenches at the operational and tactical level, they're doing the business of the nation. I see my role as responsible to setting the conditions for their success. So when I say that I owe them, because I mean it, I have to provide them with the resources, the guidance and intent to set the conditions so they can do the nation's business. So I want them to hold me accountable to that. Right? Like, I take this role very seriously personally as a Chief Master Sergeant of the Space Force, and they can do the things I can't. The dedication, the passion, the education, the training, the innovation that the Guardians who are doing that work are awe-inspiring to me. So if my role is to brag about them, talk about them, walk the halls of Congress, walk the halls of the Pentagon to get them what they need, I feel like I owe them to do that. And that's kind of where I see my role, to unleash them to their full potential, because it far exceeds my own, I think, especially from that warfighting capacity. Sure, I get the opportunity to engage and meet with senior leaders and, sit here and do interviews, but really it's all about unleashing them, bragging them, getting the resources, the attention, the advocacy that they need. So it's important to me that they understand that I feel that way, but also it creates, I think, a culture and environment that they're okay with coming to me and say, hey, Chief, this is what we really need. This is how things really are. Can you help us with that? Or, Chief, this has been a great success. Let me show you what we're doing. Because that's not all about all the bad stuff. It's also about the great stuff. So I want them to also brag about their successes, but not be afraid to share some of their challenges as well. So there's some accountability there. So it's some of the culture, leadership culture, if you will, I'm trying to, share with my Guardians.
So since we last had that broad discussion about culture, you have had priorities to cultivate Guardian culture and to make it stick, right? To make it part of the Guardian's DNA. And it's what you have called the Guardian experience. It's kind of new, at least the three parts of it, right? And I want to actually cede the floor to you for you to actually explain these three different parts, because I think they're really important.
Yeah, thanks for that opportunity. I don't think the culture's stuck. I think we're on that journey, right? Again, I think it's trying to set the conditions to let the Guardians create that culture. Even General Saltzman has said several times, you can't mandate culture from the top down. It's got to be grassroots up.
Well, it can't be stuck anyway. I mean, you guys came out of the Air Force, and there's going to come a time when that's going to be, things of yore and stories.
Yeah.
Right? And
Yeah.
it's going to be, everyone will have, come into the force as a Guardian.
Yeah. We call them OGs, Original Guardians.
There you go.
Men and women who commissioned and or enlisted directly into the Space Force. But to the rest of your question, so yeah, we kind of frame it the Guardian experience. Several months ago, we unveiled several key initiatives that go under the Guardian experience. Elevate the Journey is one of those key initiatives, and that really talks about quality of life and quality of service. That is about, how do we treat and care for our service members and their families? Everything from healthcare, housing, childcare, investing in them, right, that they're successful, spouse employment, like all those things that make this family business of serving rewarding. Like the quality of life is really important, because, there's a phrase that we say, we may scout and or recruit service members, but we retain families. And that has been loud and clear feedback, not only from personal experience, but from our engagements with Guardians, is that some people love serving, but maybe some of the challenges on the family side make them, hey, maybe I have to go do something else. So understanding the quality of life is really, really important to us for the Guardian experience, but also quality of service. Some of the things I highlighted in my keynote yesterday was about, the NCOs who are personally investing day to day, right? Aside from, are you doing your job, doing that right? But the leadership lessons, investing in those individuals as people, not just numbers, right? All adds to that quality of service, right? I'm in a profession of arms. And that to have that knowledge and feeling that your leadership truly cares about that development, that challenge you, right? So it all falls on elevating the journey. What does that journey look like from a service perspective and quality of life? The other key initiative is cultivating the warfighter, which goes back to a lot of things we've already talked about. General Saltzman revealed his 6 Space Force truths yesterday. And, one of them is that space is a warfighting domain, absolute warfighting domain. And we need warfighters to operate and execute within that domain. So cultivating the warfighter and shifting it from just not space-mindedness, but the warfighting aspect of it is critically important, because that is exactly who we are as Guardians. So making sure that they understand the threat, they understand that the space forces, the space capabilities, the space domain is not only vital to how we live our lives, but also how we fight our wars, and that they take that business seriously, is cultivating the warfighter and understanding their role as a part of the joint force. The third key initiative we talked about yesterday is, how do we create the future? We're only 5 years into this journey, and there have to be partnerships and relationships and innovation and investments that we make today so that the Space Force in 25 years from now, 30 years from now, 100 years from now, continue to be successful. And at this stage, at 5 years in, still very much in the Department of the Air Force, but still very much trying to define our culture and identity and building out and growing each year. This foundation is so important to the long-term success of the service and the Guardians. So a lot of discussions that we have in this, underneath that key initiative is, are we asking the right questions and making decisions and investments that I may never see, that will come to fruition long after I'm retired, but it's the right thing to do to have the discussion today and make the investment today. How do I plant that seed to make sure that it grows, but I may never see it? But that's a responsibility that I have, and I think senior leaders of the Space Force have today. And that's kind of a little bit of the, create the future, because those are hard conversations. A lot of times you want to be able to reap, you want to see, the benefits of the things that you're doing. And we do a lot of that. Please don't misunderstand. But at this stage in our service's history, long-term planning, long-term visions are really, really important.
But how do you implement a long-term plan, a long-term vision? That is pretty long-term. I suppose it would be like a grand O plan, type of thing. But
sure.
Is it something that you write down, or are these policies? Are these budget lines?
All the above. So
Okay.
Let's use basic military training as an example. Right now, basic military training for enlisted Guardians occur at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas. And we have our own independent, Space Force Guardian flight with Space Force Guardian military training instructors and commanders. But we are fully embedded in the complete ecosystem of the Air Force BMT, where they are graduating almost 1,000 per week. Where we're I think in 25 we're doing 800 in a year. So leveraging that infrastructure is cost effective to the nation, but is it the right process and ecosystem to create Guardians for us?
Well, is it actually cost effective long term for the nation? I would say.
So in the discussion of BMT long term, we're having this discussion right now. Is first let's talk about what do we need, what is the environment, and what do we want to accomplish when we scout talent and help them transition from civilians into Guardians? What does that look like? And then once we kind of map that out, and decide this is the right process to help the transition from a civilian into a guardian. That may take 10 weeks, it might take 3 weeks, but we want to have that discussion and not necessarily be limited to, well, within Lackland, it has to be 7.5 weeks because that's the battle rhythm of the other 35,000, airmen that go through that ecosystem every year. And, I know you want to do like a virtual sim environment that simulates employed in place forces for guardians, but one of the challenges that airmen go through is a completely different kind of model. So we have to leverage that, from maybe more of an air-minded airman as opposed to a space-minded guardian. So it's having the discussion of what do we want to do without, let's get the whiteboard out, no barriers, no restrictions, and then having that long-term vision. And then it may take 10 years to implement that, right? MILCON, the long-term planning and investments. But it's okay to have that discussion now. Now, it doesn't mean we don't talk about what are we going to change next month or next year. That process still has to continue to evolve, but not at the cost of not thinking about 30 years from now. And I think I was concerned that I was getting caught up too much in the 6 months and 12 months. What can I accomplish within my time in the office? That's not fair to guardians. It's not fair to the service. So trying to force some of those, let's have those let's sit down, let's get all the distractions out, let's put on our thinking caps and let's dream about what is that we need to do and not just what's a quick fix.
But I want to get on back to accountability a bit, right? There was a closed door town hall, I believe today with guardians earlier. Yes. You took questions yesterday from the floor from your NCOs, and I think you said something like courage is a guardian value.
It was one of our 4 service values.
But there was this courageous specialist, right, who asked you a question about education and advancement, which I think is pretty apropos to what we've been, just discussing. And those opportunities. And he accurately pointed out that many of the Space Force's NCOs have college degrees, bachelor's, master's, and last year you even told me that there was a PhD.
Yes.
And you brag on your NCOs about their talent, their focus, and the pace that they push in their training, specifically the pace, which is really, space is fast. Pace really does matter, right? But that specialist, he wants more opportunities for higher education and higher warfighting responsibilities. What can be done to meet that kind of demand? Because he can't be alone. He just happens to be the one with the courage to pick up the microphone and, tell it, right? But you are trying to keep these types of NCOs in the Space Force for the 20 or the 30-year career.
Yeah. So, I told you that, we're now recruiting guardians directly into the Space Force, for a couple of years. And if you look statistically, the maturity, life experience, and education level of guardians that we're recruiting today is higher than the other services. Now, that's probably just a side effect because we're so small.
Well, also space is nerd-tastic, and, we should embrace
I think space is pretty cool, yeah.
Right? I mean, come on.
But, all that being said.
And it's hard.
Yeah. It is. It's difficult. But all warfighting domains, right, we're all unique. That's what makes us so strong as a joint force. But, I think trying to educate and take advantage of the lifelong learning, and this is the response I had to that specialist is, when you look at the roles and responsibilities of our enlisted guardians specifically, they're the warfighters of the service. They're the subject matter experts on our weapon systems responsible for training. So it's about the education and opportunity we give them to be stronger warfighters. And in this particular question, they were comparing themselves to education opportunities that officers get. But they are 2 very separate and distinct expectations and roles. It's not that one is smarter or better than the other, but if I want to make you a better enlisted warfighter, what are those education and training opportunities that will make you better at that skill craft to execute those specific responsibilities? Maybe it's not an MBA, right? Maybe it's not the same brick and mortar university that a colonel goes to, but it's skill craft training, education with industry, learning new innovative ways to bring back to fix pain points that we have within the operational ecosystem. So the lifelong learning and investment in those guardians to take advantage of it. Absolutely. We're working through that to figure out what is those right opportunities. The fear is to not try to match something that doesn't kind of align with those roles or responsibilities for enlisted and for officers and for civilians. So very much invested in providing opportunities to tap into their potential because they're lifelong learners, but it's a different model and expectation than whether you're a civilian and whether you're an officer. But altogether, when you look at the force and what we develop enlisted, develop civilians, and develop officers, collectively is what makes us efficient and effective, not necessarily duplicating one another.
So I'm going to ask you something that came to my mind about this, about having a complete non-commissioned officer crew, right? An all-enlisted crew. And it was
Yes.
13th Space Warning Squadron. And
Yes.
they're up at Clear Space Force Station in Alaska, right? So it kind of made me think of this. And maybe I'm crazy, and you can tell me that.
Sure.
But why not change things up a bit? Maybe, I mean, do we have to have officer and enlisted in the same sort of way that all the other services are? I mean, could we think of having something like a warrant officer track? Right? Like, why even wait like the Air Force did, right? They have new warrant officers, but how many decades are we talking about here? That's a long time.
Yeah.
Space is a fast-paced place.
Yep.
Maybe,
So I'm not in any position to speak for the Air Force.
of course not.
But many conversations when we had the warrant officer discussion within the Space Force was, talented non-commissioned officers or senior NCOs that really just wanted to work on their skill craft. They wanted to be warfighters. They didn't want to go to an office. They didn't want to go to staff meetings. They just wanted to be warfighters. And they said, bring back warrant officers so I can just do my job. The warfighting job you train me to do. I have a passion for it. Well, in our enlisted development model, when we say that enlisted guardians are the warfighters of the service, and when I talk about senior NCOs specifically, maintain operational relevance, and they're going to stay connected to the warfighting mission and stay connected to how we're executing operations, then the kind of the discussion of, to your point, why not bring back warrant officers? Well, if the normal enlisted ecosystem are all warfighters, like I'm not trying to pull you away from that. I'm valuing, recognizing, right, your warfighting prowess, then why create warrant officers when that's what I want my NCOs and senior NCOs doing anyway, right? So it's almost like the warrant officer was a solution to a problem that we don't necessarily have in the Space Force because our enlisted cadre is purely built. Remember, we only have 3 specialties. Right, we have intelligence operators, cyber operators, and space operators. Now there's some institutional requirements, right? We have talent scouts, right, and we have PME instructors, but those are not. We ask them to do that for a short amount of time, but getting right back to their warfighting skills. So
Could there be a time when the Space Force wouldn't have commissioned and non-commissioned officers?
Yeah.
Just throwing it out there because, I mean, you are breaking molds.
We are.
Right?
We are, absolutely. And we are trying to be innovative, things outside the box. But the other part, which is really important, we're the 6th branch within the Department of Defense. We are a key component to the overall joint force. I think, right, there's still some benefit to how do you fit into the overall joint force, because that's how we fight our wars, right? We're part of the Department of Defense. So, to your analogy about, hey, why do you even have enlisted an officer? Like, we're still a military branch within the Department of Defense, and that is how the Defense Department is structured. And so, as important it is for us to have a service identity and a service culture, and push on the edges and do things more innovatively and create the guardians that we need, we also have to do that for the end, right? To be able to protect the nation and do the things that the Department of Defense needs us to do. And there are some commonalities there across the other services that are also very helpful.
That you need to maintain.
That should be part of the decision that when we go to make changes, what does this mean for us as a good joint partner across all the departments?
So, last question.
Man, it went by fast.
When will Chief Master Sergeant Bentivegna feel like he's achieved his goal? I don't think there's really ever an end to developing a force. but what is the benchmark that you are reaching for?
I think as leaders, I don't think we ever see an end state. And I've been using this phrase or using this kind of line recently. We're never satisfied. The future is limitless. The opportunities are boundless ahead of us. So I never want to say like, I'm done when I'm satisfied, right? Because we've accomplished this, then the next thing will come up. Because not only is the environment and the threat changing so rapidly, that drive for innovation, that drive for development, that drive to do things differently, question the status quo should never end. So I never want to have a sense where, hey, I'm done, I'm packing it up, I'm okay. But where I feel more and more, hey, do you feel like I'm being successful getting towards a state? It's when I go visit operational units and go visit the Guardians, and the things that are in my head, when I talk about warfighting, I talk about culture, I talk about the importance of creating the future, right? And the importance of us taking care of one another, right? To elevate the journey. When they're beating me to the punchline, when they're already telling me about those things, like, Chief, this is what we're doing to get after that. Chief, this is important to us. I think that gives me the sense of, man, like, maybe I could take a breath, right? That I'm having the right impact and I'm doing that job effectively. But I think being done, I never see that, because I don't think any of us should ever be satisfied. We could always be better, always continue to evolve. And then there's always a responsibility, right, to grow the next generation. That never stops, right? So as I look out, there's so many talented chiefs that work with me, and I look out across the field and I see several SimSIF number 3s. I look at my senior master sergeant, I see SimSIF number 4s. I see combatant command C-cells, right? So that drive to continue to grow and develop them and give them opportunity, that never stops. So when will I be satisfied and done? I think when I get my retirement decoration and I pass the flag to SimSIF number 3, I think at that point, I'll say I'm done. But until that point, I will be running full steam.
B9, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I really enjoyed having this chance to chat with you again. It's been great.
That's it for this week. For your daily dose of award-winning defense coverage, listen to the Defense and Aerospace Report with Vago Muradian. And for the maritime domain, listen to Cavis Ships with Chris Cavis and Chris Cervello. And get your air domain news and analysis from the Air Power Podcast with JJ Gertler and Vago Muradian. I'm Laura Winter. Thank you for listening.